In the previous modules, you've taken an implicit association test as a culminating activity. This lecture focuses on the science behind the IAT. In this lecture, we're going to look at the history of the IAT, which comes from a long and well-researched subdomain of cognitive science, which specifically focuses on priming and strong associates. The results of an IAT might be distressing or unbelievable when you get them. It's important to understand that the IAT measures biases and not overt discriminatory behavior. It's also been shown that the IAT is reliable and valid in several different studies, so dismissing the results of an IAT is not the correct way forward after getting your results. By the end of this module, you'll be able to describe priming, explain the relationship between response time and association, and understand common responses to IAT results. One of the first studies focusing on semantic priming in the same way as the IAT measures it, so using a keyboard to respond. I mean, semantic priming has been researched long before 1979, but in 1979, one of the first studies to actually use the same setup was this one by Richard Sperber and colleagues. The IAT got its start here. Semantic priming simply means that words or pictures that are related to or associates of other words will bring those other words to the forefront of the mind, and then those words will be more quickly recognized and processed when they're finally shown to the participant. As an example, let's imagine that you're participating in an experiment, and what you're told is that you're going to sit at a computer, you're going to see pictures and words. You have a keyboard in front of you just like normal, but this keyboard only has two working keys. One on the left is going to allow you to respond to words that have a good connotation, and one on the right is only going to it'll let you respond to words that have a bad connotation. Those are the only two things you can respond to with this keyboard, and then you're shown, before you ever see a word, a picture of a bug. Well, that's gross. And then you're shown the word disgusting. So, of course, what you're going to do is you're going to respond with your right hand because that word has a bad connotation. But because you've been shown the picture of the bug, which brings up in your mind ideas of disgust, ideas of maybe fear, if you are afraid of bugs, and other negative concepts, that you're faster to respond to the word disgusting when it finally comes up because you've been primed to think of it. So you're faster to recognize it, and then that means you're faster to respond to it. And that's semantic priming. And that's also how this type of test is used to gauge semantic priming. These are the results of this study. To walk you through this, when you look at when a picture primes a related picture, the response time is about 605 milliseconds. When a word primes a related picture, so this is kind of the opposite of what we just did, but a word is going to prime a related picture, then the response time is about maybe 625 milliseconds. When a word and picture both prime an unrelated picture, these are the response times that we see. Those are significantly higher than the response times for the related picture. You can see the same thing in the short bars over on the left side. That's when a picture and word prime a related word. So that's a lot faster. There's just a main effective word here. Words are faster to be responded to than pictures. And over here is the response times for when a picture and word prime an unrelated word. And again, what you're seeing here is that when related words and pictures prime a related word or picture, you have significantly faster response times. So when a related word primes another related word, how do participants react? So we can think about this sort of like a mathematical equation, actually. If we take a positive prime and we add it to a positive target, we get a faster response time. So if we have a picture of a bug, and that's paired with the word disgusting, that equals a faster response time. So now we can, like I said, treat it like a mathematical equation and start taking things out because we know all of the quantities except one. So we can take a positive prime and we can pair it with an unknown variable. If the response is still faster, then that means that the unknown variable is a positive target. The opposite is true too. If we have a positive prime and we put in an unknown quantity and the result is a slower response time, that means it's a negative target. So we can start to infer associations from this type of maybe cognitive equation is what we can call it. Let's put this a little bit more concrete. So if we think about this in the world of market research, this is either a soda or a beer, depending on the time of the day when you're watching this video, or how thirsty you are. We've got two beers, one on the left maroon, one on the right gold, and we're going to pair those with the word delicious. We're going to pair them with a whole bunch of words in this experimental procedure, but really the one that we want to know about is what happens when they're paired with the word delicious. So we see that the maroon beer, when it's paired with the word delicious, participants respond that delicious has a good connotation at about 523 milliseconds. When they're shown the yellow beer, they respond that delicious has a good connotation at about 478 milliseconds. So what we can infer here is that the yellow beer is actually more strongly associated with a good connotation. And so this is the market research here. We know that consumers associate yellow beer with good connotation. Why is beer maroon? It shouldn't be the color of blood. This is actually one of the first ways that the IAT was used. Market research. It wasn't called the IAT back then, but it was the same procedure. And some of the things that were gleaned from this were that watches that have upturned hands look a little bit more like a smile, and they're preferred to downturned hands. We also see that wines with frogs on the label jump higher in the ratings. And also, this is pretty obvious, but products with pictures of dogs on them are also more preferred, more strongly associated with happiness. The next research in the timeline brings it a little bit back closer to what we think of as the IAT. Now we're looking at the automatic activation of attitudes. This study uses two different kinds of things, priming based on concrete objects and abstract concepts. And again, what we see, well, here are those strong good and strong bad primes. Gift, music, party, and cake are strong good primes. Death, hell, guns, and crime are strong bad primes. Also sounds like a great name for a metal band. Here's the results from that study. Really quickly, just to orient you, this is looking at response time facilitation. So a higher bar in this case actually means that something is going to be faster, and a negative number here means it's going to be slower. This is a little bit backwards from what we were seeing earlier, where taller bars meant that it took longer because we were coming from a zero time baseline. This is different because this is facilitation, not just raw time. But essentially, the story here is what we saw before. Positive prime paired with a positive thing is going to lead to a roughly 45, maybe somewhere between 45 and 50 millisecond benefit, facilitation to the response. And a negative prime to a positive item is going to lead to roughly a 50 millisecond lag in response time. And the opposite is true for negative primes. Negative targets, rather, sorry. Positive primes are going to hinder the response time for negative targets, and negative primes are going to increase the response time for negative targets. This study is really one of the first ones that brought us into the modern IAT era. This was using the same idea of pleasant and unpleasant words, but this time looking at male and female first names. One of these authors, Greenwald, went on to later the same year developed the IAT. This version of the IAT looked at pleasant and unpleasant words and some other concepts. Among those other concepts were the words Korean and Japanese. And the participants in the study were either Korean or Japanese participants. And what you see is that really strong in-group versus out-group bias. Korean participants associated good qualities, pleasant qualities with themselves a lot quicker. So they had a response time benefit there, 550 milliseconds. When responding to pleasant words and Japanese, it took them maybe 675 milliseconds possibly. So a longer time, a significantly longer time. The story is the same for the Japanese participants. They're faster to associate themselves with pleasant terms and slower to associate the word Korean with pleasant terms. One of the first studies using the word associates and response time framework looked at implicit attitudes for what? So once you take the IAT, there are some common responses. The IAT uses the 40-plus year history that we just talked about to show our biases for things like bugs or products like wines with frogs on them, gender, race, disability, and a slew of other human qualities. Sometimes the results of the IAT aren't what we think they should be, though. Like our emotional response to viewing our own IAT results are not what we think they should be. It's important to note that biases are not outward prejudices. They're not prejudices that manifest themselves in social situations. They can be. They could lead to that, or maybe they already are, but they don't necessarily pinpoint that. So what I mean is, if you're white and you take an IAT that shows that you associate white faces more with positive words, that doesn't mean that you are racist. It doesn't mean you act racist in your day-to-day life. It just reveals a bias. It's important to know our biases so that we can make sure that they don't lead to health disparities, prejudices, or any of those other nasty things. Some of the things that are common responses to the IAT are feeling disbelief, disregard for the IAT itself, acceptance, discomfort, and distress. Acceptance, of course, is great. That's the best response. Discomfort can be okay too. It can be uncomfortable to learn that you have a bias that you didn't think you had, but discomfort is easy to get out of. It's good to know this about yourself, and then you can know that bias exists and just make sure that doesn't impact the way that you interact with anyone or any decisions that you make. Distress is not great. Distress isn't what the IAT is trying to promote. The goal of the IAT isn't shame or panic. And if you have felt any of those things going through any of the IATs, that's really not the goal of the IAT. The IAT is just to point out where a bias exists. The goal of the IAT is knowledge, not shame. Just knowing that you have a bias allows you to take that in stride as you make decisions and go through your life. Now, going back to the top two here, disbelief and disregard, those are also not great reactions. A lot of people question if the IAT is truly measuring what it says, or how stable the IAT is over time. Maybe it's just one day, and the next day it would be very different. Maybe. Studies have also shown that taking the IAT can lead to immediate changes in behavior. This study here shows that participants whose qualitative IAT responses were more negative were then subsequently more likely to help someone of a different race. So the IAT in this case has a positive outcome. So if you're feeling distress, you shouldn't. It leads to a positive outcome. Knowing about yourself allows you to make better choices in the future. Now, disbelief or disregard, we actually have data that can show that as well. The Implicit Association Test has been the subject of a meta-analysis every few years. This is just one. but it's been the subject of meta-analysis in more recent years as well. Essentially, a meta-analysis looks at all of the studies that have been conducted in one area and pulls them together to look at the overall effect of some quality. In this case, it's the implicit association test. So we see that across 3 different studies, the IIT has great internal consistency, correlation of between 0.69 and 0.9. It has great test-retest reliability. This is across 2 different studies, and has good construct validity across 3 different studies. So this shows that it is both a valid and reliable measure. So to review, when 2 concepts are highly associated, they offer a response time benefit, which means you answer faster to the second one when you've been primed by a related word. There is less conceptual distance between associates, so this means that delicious and that yellow beer were a lot closer in conceptual distance than the red beer and the word delicious. Thinking about one associate primes another. So thinking about one term, one concept, like something that's pleasant, will prime things that are associated with the concept of pleasantness. And this is how we can do things like gauge people's attitudes towards men's versus women's names, faces of their race versus a different race, etc. The IIT capitalizes on this phenomenon to elucidate biases. But remember, biases do not imply overt prejudice. Knowing your personal biases can help avoid overt prejudices. So quite the opposite. Again, distress is not what the IIT is after. And then if your response is disbelief or disregard, there's a lot of research backing up the IIT as a valid and reliable measure. Here are the references used in this lecture. You can pause here if you want to look at any of them, and thanks for listening.